Oh, well, Chris, um, I'm like feeling quite emotional thinking about our
Oh,
conversation, actually. Yeah, I've just been hearing about your dad and the connection, and my gosh, and just like these past years and just how big they've been for everyone,
yeah.
and how when we face grief, it's kind of like it's so much easier and we just want to kind of push it down and push it to the side. And yet it's like also evidence of how much we love, but we also don't want to be going through it. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I want to know, first of all, like, did you ever think you'd write about grief?
No, actually, I didn't. But then I look back on my career, and this is my seventh book. And I look back and I chuckle to myself because I'm like, you know what? You kind of always write about hard things. Cancer, vegetables. To some people, that's a hard conversation. And now
Well, to
grief.
make it sexy.
Yeah. So I'm like, you've always been in this realm. And so it's not that different. I think you said it so beautifully, and I know you've had this experience, or actually I'm curious if you've had this experience. There's the experience of writing your books and being in the energy of that. And for me, I'm always learning and growing and expanding through my writing process. And the book ends up being one thing between you and the pages, and then it goes out in the world and the book becomes something else. It's like I have had a new experience of it in the past year. And it's been really interesting to see because I haven't had that experience with any other book that I'm aware of. And I
Wow.
think, yeah.
Yeah, because I know that this book for you, it's just like this book that I've just written as well. Oh my God, it just took me so long to write. And it was like it was, oh my God, I wanted it to be over, but also like I didn't even know what it was about until right at the end. And
Mm,
like with this book for you, like compared to a lot of your other books, to hold it looks shorter, which I love a shorter book personally, but I can feel it's like it was such a process. Like what was the writing process like did you go in knowing exactly what you were going to write about, or did you know it was going to be cathartic? Was it like, yes, I want to write it, or oh my God, I I'm not sure if I want to, but I know I need to?
mm. All of those things. I think in some ways it feels shorter because there's no graphics. This is the first book I've
Mm,
written that doesn't have an enormous amount of photos and,
mm,
all of this other stuff. I I think going back to what I'll tie in my first musing, which is basically it was one thing and then it became something else when it entered so many other
mm,
hands. And then seeing how people, so many of us, myself included, going into this process have a resistance around certain emotions or certain
mm,
explorations of self.
mm,
And to be able to normalize that process and thaw into those conversations and see where people's resistance is, some of which
mm,
mirrored my own, or I was like, I didn't think of that. Okay, how do I get in there?
mm,
Has been a
mm.
really beautiful process. But the writing itself was cathartic, healing. I think I mean, that's what I love about writing is that I think it's so therapeutic. And I've been in therapy for so many years and have done so much personal work. And nothing gets me deeper than my own writing, So I do appreciate that other people have benefited from it. I am my number one reader. A-
Mm. And
And I,
do you find that do you write to yourself, like younger versions, or like what's your process?
it changes. But no, I don't necessarily write to myself, but I do try and write from my heart, like really tapping
Mm,
into what it is that I feel. It's so easy to start a project, you pitch a project. And like you, I did not really have a full scope of what this project would be. In fact, when I sold it, it was titled The Unicorn Project because I didn't have a name for it. And I was like, I can't name it first because this book will not allow that. Are you up for this process? I'm going to find it. It's going to be, I think, a very powerful piece of work. But if you need, you know, the 7 bullet points and the strategy and the blueprint and the framework now, this is not a right fit for you. And thankfully, you know, the Hay House was like, nope, you go take your time. We'll call it the Unicorn Project and let's see what comes out of you. And I needed that space. I don't always recommend that space because I think it can also be, it can create a lot more work, I think, in some ways, because I have to travel down certain roads and then decide, oh, I needed that, but the reader didn't. So it might not be as efficient always, but when we're dealing with the heart, it isn't about efficiency.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. And I'm curious because, like, I don't know, for me, I'm grateful for the work I do. And I also find the whole public thing and the like brand thing of like, this is who I am. And then, you know, and then you go through change and you're like, well, I'm not who I am, who I was. And, you know, other people are like, you're not who you were. You're like, of course I'm not. I don't know who I am. You know, like, how do you find that, especially going through, you know, something so significant as losing your dad and everything that we've all been going through the past few years?
So
That's such a big question.
It's a great question. I've been in the public eye since I was a teenager. So I've been performing since I was a kid. My first career was as a dancer and then an actress. And I got my first agent when I was 19. So I've been on and off camera or stage or film or something, or teaching or something in the arts, but in a public way since I was very young. And I made a promise with myself long ago, which is if you believe the good, you have to believe the crap. So why don't you just believe what you think? And continue to develop that sense of self. And I think because I've been doing this for 20 years, I came onto the scene with a very difficult topic. It was very vulnerable and raw and emotional. And it was originally a documentary film that I sold to Discovery Channel and then the Oprah Winfrey Network. And so I've always been sharing from my heart the realest, rawest, most sensitive, tender parts of myself, but also here's what's helped me. And I think the biggest thing is when you start to get some recognition, and recognition is very, back when I was starting, it was like, oh, you sold a show, you have a TV show, you are in the New York Times or whatever it is. Now you can have an enormous amount of recognition just by social media. You know, it's like very different. Everybody gets to have a platform now. I think the most important thing to give yourself permission to do is to allow yourself to continually evolve and not be the version of yourself. But the more visible you get, I think it's easy to want to like polish yourself and be right for everybody and round out the edges and not ruffle feathers because you don't want to, create dust storms online. And I think that that's a slow death for the creative soul. And I think it's really important for us to, if we're going to put ourselves out there, continually push ourselves to be ourselves. And what's interesting is the more that we do that, the better our relationships become with our communities. Like even the more you do that with a loved one, you don't even have to do that in terms of a brand. The more you're willing to like show up and be truly yourself, the deeper connection we have. So with this book, I decided I was going back to beginner's mind because when I first started, I had no idea what I was doing. And I was just a wild writer. And
so true. So my husband, Craig, who he came up before, he hasn't read your previous books or whatever. I definitely did. But he's like, oh, Chris has got a really good brand. Maybe it's a new brand. Have you heard of Crazy Sexy? And I'm like, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's so true when we're starting out, or when we don't feel like there's so many eyes on us. It's so much easier to just go for it, be more kind of like reckless in a way, which is raw and true, and yeah.
Yeah, and free. And so we find our
And
way back to that,
free.
hopefully, is to
Yes.
stay in that
But
place of
but
freedom.
but I think grief also invites us to do that. Like if we like let it kind of rip us open in that way. Like I read something the other day where it was talking about the difference between grief and depression, and how grief is like pure life force moving through us. It's like,
Mm.
it's not necessarily a good thing. It doesn't feel necessarily always like a good thing, but it's raw because it is this like brutal kind of polarity of life and love and loss and ecstasy and agony, all of that together. Like I know with me, when I've experienced grief, there is this kind of tender holding of the opposites of like, you know, when you're really mourning and you're like, this is so painful, my heart aches so much, but there's like an intimacy as well
Mm.
of the connection. Did you
Yeah.
feel like that with your dad, and do you still now? And
Yeah, I think that, you know, it puts things into sharp perspective. And so what's not serving you starts to slough away if you allow it to.
mm,
And,
mm,
you know, one of the
mm,
things, the reason why I wrote this book is because it had been a while since I had written a book, and I wanted to write another book. Hay House wanted me to write another book. And this is what was up for me. So I wrote it during a very difficult time, which so many of us also went through. So yes, I was losing somebody very important to me, but my business was changing. We're in a pandemic. And I realized that there's these stages and these chapters of life where it really does feel like it's falling apart, where you might even feel like the rug's being pulled out from under you, or you've been kicked in the teeth, or things will never be the same again. And will you even survive this time? We as humans, we will have these experiences. And I think because we live in a very curated world where we put certain experiences on pedestals and we bury others because they're deemed not good enough or too frightening to attend to, that few of us have the skills that we need and the wherewithal that we need to survive these kinds of storms that will come. And so I wanted to put that on the table and say, hey, this is life. We can't say, I'll take the rainbow, but hold the rain. So how are we going to deal with the messy moments? And how are we going to care for and tend to and grow through those messy moments? And how are we going to let those messy moments actually help us prioritize what you had just asked, or what we were just talking about, that intimacy? How are we going to let those messy moments shape the rest of our lives in ways that make them even better, make them more meaningful? Because life is a terminal condition. We're all going to die. Somebody said to me recently, you have a terminal diagnosis. I said, so do you. It's called life. And many of us have more days behind than in front. It's going by really quickly. So that means the more intentional we are, the better it's going to be. And so if we avoid these places, then I think we're also avoiding and limiting our freedom.
And did you have like a particular moment in your life where you kind of woke up to that way of living, like as in, maybe like an awakening, or like was it that diagnosis that you had, or did something happen earlier, or was it something like the connection to soul or spirit? Was that something that was like always there for you?
On and off. I have a fickle faith, as I say, fickle, fluid, and feral faith. So on and off, but I would say that I've had some big moments, right? So I call them ruptures in the book. And those are the moments we talked about earlier. So I'd say, this most recent rupture brought me back to the original one. And that's what can happen when we go through these difficult times. Other parts and other past experiences, other traumas come up for tending, right? And so, but I would say the one that's most visceral, and maybe the one that I'm definitely the most known for sharing, is, so I live with stage 4 cancer. I've been living with cancer for over 2 decades now. So that was my initial like big wake up call of like, hey, I don't know how long you have to live. I don't know how you're going to survive this thing. I don't even know what this damn thing is. It's so rare. So we got a lot of work to do. However, meta, how are you going to get busy living? And I was only 31 at the time. So you think you have a whole lot more years before you have to think about these things. So mortality is something that I'm very conscious of because of my health condition.
And you're like, when that rupture came, I'm curious, like, what did it look like from a timing perspective of like you being able to go, like, because a lot of people would be like, wouldn't do what you did with that information. Like, how long did it take, or was it just instant for you to be like, no, like I'm going to do something with this?
It was pretty, there's a lot of ways to answer that question, but I'll start by saying, because I have a very rare cancer, for the people who don't understand what the heck I'm talking about, if you're new to me, back then, over 20 years ago, there was very little known about it. So I had to become the CEO of my health, first and foremost, to find the right doctor, because the first doctor that I spoke to suggested a triple organ transplant. The next one gave me 10 years to live. So I had to be really careful who I gave my care to, because it would have affected my longevity, period. And I realized that because nobody could agree. And everybody said, this is a total black box. It's not like you have breast cancer or something that is way more known and has walks and ribbons and funding.
Yeah, right.
There was none of that. So I was like, okay. And then when I decided, I finally found the right doctor, and he said, I think we should watch and wait and let cancer make the first move, because sometimes it can be aggressive and sometimes it can be more slow growing. And it can change. So we just have to track you. I can't I have dozens of tumors, right? So it's not like we can cut them out, give you chemo, do radiation, and you can have it be behind you. We can't do that. So I was like, oh boy, this is something that's different, because I had no reference point for it. So it was like, all right, I guess I'm going to have to go on this journey of watching and waiting and tracking, and ultimately learning how to live with cancer, learning how to live with something that I would not have signed up for. And every single one of us have something that we may have to learn to accept. And that's a big spiritual practice, right? Without succumbing to the fear, living in the anxiety, being, taken down by the ruminations and the what ifs and the self-flagellation and the why me's. So that,
and let's talk about
the big one.
rage when it comes to like processing grief and surrendering and all of that.
Yes, I'd love to.
Oh my God. What is your favorite way to process rage?
My favorite way is healthy ways. My least favorite ways is when I don't process them in healthy ways, which I write about in the book. Those can be pretty embarrassing ways. I've had to do a lot of business with my anger, because I think when we are domesticated in family structures that deem certain behaviors as positive and others as negative, then it's very difficult to know what to do with the emotions that you're not allowed to express. And so anger was a part that I wasn't really allowed to express growing up. And so of course, anything that you repress is going to come out like a monster. And so I had a hard time managing anger. Oh, I've always had a hard time managing anger. I'm much better now. But I think that this is what's exciting about this conversation and about this exploration for anybody out there who's interested in it. You can't amputate any of your emotions and expect to be whole. Mm-hmm. To me, wholeness is the point. That's why we're here. Mm-hmm. And if there is a part that you're struggling with, if you're going through a difficult time, that's the part that's going to come up for healing. Mm-hmm. And so what I try to do in the book is lay out in different chapters the various experiences and emotions that you might have when you get punched in the face by life. Mm-hmm. And to your point, rage is one of them. And so what I love to do is to get curious about each of these emotions. So you talk about anger. The more I did my work through therapy, but also really in a lot of the research for this book, I realized that anger is a signaling emotion. It's so important. This is why we're still here, right? Anger will say, hey, that's not safe. Or there's injustice here. I'm going to fight for this. But oftentimes underneath anger is a whole bunch of other stuff, tender stuff. And in some ways, anger can be a great protector. And for me, underneath all that anger and rage was a whole lot of sadness, a whole lot of shame, a whole lot of self-loathing. And when I was able to say, oh, anger, what do you have to teach me? And then I can go deeper into those places, put a little sunshine on that. I feel like that's when a deeper level of healing has happened for me. I mean, I've been on the healing path for over 2 decades. The biggest healing I've done is in the last 4 years. Mm-hmm. This work is it. And I think it's like the greatest joy of my life to talk about this stuff.
I so resonate with that. Yeah, for me, anger, expressing, I would even say just like rage rather than anger, like that old fury that like you don't even know that you have. Like when I had my son, it was just after COVID. Well, it was in COVID. Lockdown had just happened, and I started really getting on top of my health. I discovered a couple of allergies that I had, like food that I was consuming, and that happened. And then the initiation of becoming a mom and all of that. And without warning, in my postpartum, this rage just erupted within me. It was like I was a volcano at night. Yeah, it was like this volcano erupting at night, like this white hot rage. I'm like, where is this coming from? And I could feel this choice that I had, and I saw how years and decades really of like suppressing that through like addictions, whether it's overworking or whatever it is, like just trying to control things, had been holding me captive. And something about the perfect conditions of postpartum really allowed that to erupt out. And you'd catch me pretty much every single night, like screaming into pillows and like banging. And
that's just very healthy.
Like, well, yeah, I mean, that was me consciously trying to do it through therapy and all of that. But it was, and in many cases, like, there sometimes there was stories attached to them, but sometimes it was just so much more deep than that. And sure enough, after, like, honestly, it was months and months and months, then came the sadness, then came the helplessness, the I'm feeling powerless, all of that. And I think
go ahead. No, I don't mean to cut you off.
And it's like, yeah, like it was that that feeling, which I think grief often gives us. We were talking about it before, that kind of, it's like a horrible feeling and a comforting feeling at the same time, where it's like you kind of find your way to the ground. Like there's that humbleness feeling. And I feel having touch that space. And I wonder if you're the same. Like, since I've been teaching after that, I just feel like all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I feel like I don't need to fix anyone because I'm not trying to push something down myself.
That's beautiful insight. I think that's such a big takeaway. I want to touch on that, and then I'll tell you a very messy rage story. Yeah, it's good. It's really good. It's really bad and really good. You know, I have a chapter in the book that's all about awkward times, awkward people. It's all of the things that we say or don't say and how we, you know, screw up because we have no idea what the heck we're doing, and how we just have to like become a little bit more literate. I call it, well, it's not just I call this grief illiteracy. But I would say it's big, messy emotions illiteracy, not just grief. And how we can educate ourselves, but also be more compassionate towards ourselves and others, because we're all flailing around, right? And I would say, you know, well, in that chapter specifically, I talk about all the ways that we can create distance between us and somebody who's going through a difficult time without even knowing it. You know, it's the things that we say, like you genuinely have good intentions, like, oh, you had a miscarriage, you'll have another child.
Yeah,
Or,
yeah.
oh, you know, he's in a better place now. Or, oh, everything happens for a reason. Or, oh, it's only a dog. Why are you so sad? You know, we are trying to give comfort, but it can be received as very distancing. And I think the other things that we do unconsciously is we may center ourselves, right? We hear about something that's going on with somebody and we want to create that connection again. So what do? We start to say, oh, that happened to you. Look what happened to me. And now the other person doesn't feel seen, heard, you know, nourished. Or perhaps we start to give advice. And if you're a coach out there, of course, this is what you do for a living. You're going to start coaching. But the person doesn't want coaching. The person just wants like, or maybe they do, but they, you know, to be able to say like, do you want to hear advice or do you want to just like vent and need a shoulder and so I think that the more we navigate this terrain, ultimately, the easier it is to be a human being. And I think you said it so beautifully, which is what gave me this idea to talk about this, is more often than not, people just want to be heard. And it's so much easier. You don't have to fix anything. It's just about having the bravery to show up in the messy and be like, you know what? This is a SHIT show. And I'm going to sit with you in the storm because I love you. And it's like, I think the kindest, most beautiful thing that you can do for somebody. So much easier than coming in and being like, oh, what do I say? What do I do? How do I fix?
But then sometimes it's like actually sitting there with someone in that pain. It's like sometimes that pain triggers something within that other person there, and that's the reaction. So it's actually not about that other person at all.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a great opportunity for everybody's healing, but you know, to just like zip yourself up, take deep breaths and say, you know, I don't have to fix this and I can be with what
you don't
comes
have to
to
fix
me.
it. And yeah, there was this thing I read the other day on the highest vibration is not love or unconditional love or light or whatever we say it is. It's actually authenticity. And I think that's what happens when you're met with someone who isn't trying to change the way things are or is just honest about the way things are. It's like you can feel it. There's this vibration of like, it just is.
Yeah.
You know?
What would it be like to work less hard? I think we all work so hard and we're all so exhausted, and to like put the burden down and to sort of surf the emotions and because I think that's a big part of what holds us back is we're so afraid of certain places that we push and we hustle and we avoid and we do all the things. And honestly, it takes more energy to do those things. And life force and joy force. And joy force is something that we should not give away freely. Do you want to hear my
tell
disgusting
the rage story?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay. Yes. You're like, can we go back to that messy moment? I talk about it in the book, and I'll shorten the story, but basically I put a lot of pressure on myself to make every moment a great moment and to sort of be our tour director of end of life experiences while my dad was still here. And I am adopted. So my dad was my chosen father. He was very important to me and still is. And so we're at my birthday. We've gone to this very beautiful resort. I'm trying to make everything great. This is my second to last birthday that I have with him. And it's a beautiful experience. And I'm only trying to have beautiful experiences. Okay, the pressure. Can you see where this is going? Like, it's destined to fail, you know? And so we come out of this wildly expensive, wonderful dinner, and there's a bunch of drunk guys there. And my husband is getting our car. We're getting into my parents' minivan, you know what I mean? And he's getting the attendant who brings the car over, and there's these drunk guys, and they start harassing me. And then they get into my parents' minivan. My dad's still inside. My mom's using the restroom. My husband's paying the attendant, and they pile into the mini car. They take over. They start rummaging through it. And then the physical harassment starts, right? Oh, baby, come with us. Like, come, let's get a drink. They think it's an Uber. I don't know what the hell these guys think it is. And I'm like, you need to get out of the car, get your hands off of me, all this kind of stuff. And then there's this moment where, when you can read about it in the book, one of the guys says something terrible, and it's "Pop goes the weasel." And I lose it to the level that the security has to come. Okay. Security comes. Literally, I was like, I'm ready to fight. I'm going to throw down, hold my purse, get my earrings out. It was insane to me.
Wow.
And then my dad comes out of the bathroom and he sees what's happening and he starts to like shake. And he is a wisp of himself. If something had taken place where I'm, all of a sudden like throwing down like a prize fighter, and by chance he could have gotten, knocked off his feet because he was just there, he'd been in the emergency room. So this thing escalates, and afterwards, the shame that floods through with my inability to manage my emotions, all of the things. It was just debilitating. It was so painful. It was like a rage hangover on steroids. That's a real thing I've learned. And underneath it was a whole lot of sadness, because I really felt like, how dare these guys get to live, and this person who's so precious has to go. And what does it do? It brings me to the original paternal wound of being abandoned. My biological father left when he heard about me, and I met him 18 years later, and then he left again when I wrote my first book, and he didn't like something that I said. So I'm going through all of this. I didn't know why, I'm losing my crap. These guys are idiots. They don't need to. What's going on here? What is going on is I'm literally going to a place of, oh my gosh, I'm going to be abandoned again. I'm this little child whose dad is leaving. How did that happen in the parking lot from 0 to 60? I don't know. But that's what I'm talking about when these big moments happen. I think that there's a treasure of healing waiting for us, and too often we avoid it or we shame ourselves. What's wrong with me? No, what's right with you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like these portals open, like these doors of like But I think it's also interesting that it happened on your birthday. Like,
Of course you would say that, you smarty. I didn't even realize that.
it's the imprint.
Wow.
Have
That's
you
so good.
noticed that with you, that like on your birthday, like stuff comes up? I know I
Yep.
notice it for myself.
I guess I better start noticing a little bit more. Yes, I think you're right about that. Thank you for that breadcrumb.
You know, I had this. So I've given birth twice, and I ended up doing a lot of work around unpacking blueprint of birth to prepare for my kid's birth, because they say that everyone in the room brings the blueprint for it's like a whole thing. I find it so fascinating. But I drilled my mum on my birth over and over again. All she said, it was fast, you came early, we had no pillow for you. Like that was the whole story. But it wasn't until after I had my son. So my mum had the baby she'd had before me was when she was a teenager, sent away, and she never got to nurse her baby because she was given away for adoption. And then I was the baby that came next. And there were so many babies that were born on that day that we were in the hallway, and then we were taken to a room with another person, and we were meant to be on our own apparently. And they wouldn't normally do this, but there weren't enough beds. And the woman who we were sharing a room with had just lost her baby. And so in this one room, you've got celebration of life and sheer grief. Me crying brought in that mother's milk, which made her wail. And when my mum told me that, and she told me just in passing, hadn't mentioned it ever before, and I just sobbed, because that blueprint, that kind of concoction of emotions is what I felt particularly every single birthday, but really it's like deep within my cells. Yeah, I think it's a thing.
Wow, that is so powerful. Thank you for sharing that. That's really important. And I'm going to spend some
It's
time with
amazing.
that.
I love that story that you shared with, and I wonder if it is like that. It's amazing that you could see that, like it was that ultimate fear of abandonment or memory or whatever. That's incredible.
This is what happens when we start to dig around, right? I ultimately, I think that it is really more so every single person that listens to you, I believe that they are drawn to your light. They're drawn to your ability to provide comfort, care, expansion, to connect to your heart and to spirit. And all of that, to me, is a form of liberation in this lifetime. And to me, it just feels good to feel good, not just because I'm eating well and taking care of myself. You know, the first part of my career was about addressing what you're eating. I have many cookbooks. I have many books on plant-based living and prevention. You know, like these are important things because they have helped this physical body stay around, feel good, have fun in sneakers. But I think it's this holistic health is really the combination of addressing what you're eating and also what's eating you. And what's eating you could be a lack of connection to your higher power or whatever higher power of your knowing, if that's what you believe. It could be some of these old boo-boos and traumas and dramas that are still relived in the day-to-day behaviors or even in yourselves that you don't even know. You know what I mean? These imprints, as you say. And so I think the more we say, I have a limited time here in this body and I want it to feel good, then you might be more interested in doing some of this work as opposed to being like, oh, grief, big, hard stuff. I'm not up for that right now. If you have that sense that you're not up for it, it means it's what you need to do.
Oh, Chris, I honestly don't know anyone who is better with words than you. You just can always come out with the alliteration and everything. So incredible. Oh, I feel like I wanna close with a question about like you and your dad and like your relationship now. Like, what is that like? Like, has him leaving changed your perception of what happens when we die? Or yeah.
I am so open to the mystery, and I don't know, but I'm okay with the unknown. And I do feel deep connection to him because I know that, love never dies, energy never dies. It just changes. And so I talk to him all the time. I ask him for advice all the time. I still tell him what's going on. He would call me and say, "Hey, love, what's doing?" And I'd be like, "Hey, Dad, here's what's doing." And so I tell him what's doing. I go on my walk, and if I'm going through a problem, he, like me, was an entrepreneur, and I'd be like, "I don't know what to do about this thing. And what do you think I should do? Should I hire this person?" Like, I still ask him those questions. And I do think that I get messages from him, and that I will continue to. You will love this quick story, which is when he died. He died on February 11th, and Valentine's Day is my cancerversary. So I was diagnosed on Valentine's Day, and he would always send me roses you'll always be my Valentine. And now, this is the first time I'm not going to get roses. And it's also, I'm with my mom. We're in Florida, and my husband's really stressed out because he gets me flowers. But should I get your mom flowers? Is that weird? Is that just going to make her feel more sad? And he's really stressed out about it. And I say, "Honey, if you're so stressed out about it, this is not for you to give, and you can't make it better anyway. So just let it go." And she and I go for a walk on the beach, and we're both in shock. I mean, he's just passed with us. He passed at home, and it was the most beautiful experience I've ever had, and the most powerful experience that I've ever had. And there's so much to unpack about that, which we can do in the future if you'd ever like to. But so here we are walking and in shock, and we're going down far beyond anybody at the beach. And I see these two roses standing at attention, just flapping like this.
Like
Literally
in
the sand.
Wow. Oh, I just got chills.
Mom! Right? And so we get the roses. We're blown away. We're like, "Oh my gosh, this is from Dad." We get the roses. We're walking back. We're in a different kind of shock, but with like a whole lot of joy in it, and a sense of just heart expansion. We get to the car, and I look up. There's this little apartment complex, and I see somebody watching a Netflix program. And it's just starting, so you see the trailer, and it's this big screen TV. And it says "Surviving Death."
Whoa.
So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go with that. And I'm open to the mystery.
And amazing signs.
and amazing signs, which making our lives this treasure hunt of being willing to look and ask and stay on that joyful, curious, like childlike joy of that treasure hunt of signs and synchronicities and spirit and knowings. To me, there's no downside to that. There's only a plus. And I'm still joyfully on that path.
Thank you for sharing that story and just everything that you shared today. Especially the Rage Sora story. That is, yeah, really, you can feel that deep down. Oh, well, I want everyone to go out and get Chris's book. I'm not a morning person. And if you've got someone who is going through a period of grief as well, I think it's a great thing. You know, it's a great way to show support as well. I know what it's like when we have loved ones going through periods of grief and it hits us like waves. And yeah, I think it'd be a very helpful thing. So thank you so much, Chris. Everyone find you on your website. What's the best place?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rebecca. It's such a joy to talk to you. I love your light. And I can't wait to have you on my podcast very soon, which is exciting.
I know.
Yeah. So I'm at chriscarr.com, Chris with a K, and you can find the book wherever books are sold. And on Instagram, I'm at Crazy Sexy Chris.